to another Garden City Arts online program. My name is Katie Guthrie and I'm going to be your instructor for the day. Today you are watching a painting tutorial video. Now, this segment that you are enjoying right now is kind of the introduction to the beginner video where I tell you about all the materials you need to have. So if you've already watched this once, no worries. I'm sorry you have to hear it again. You can just fast forward. The segment is about 5 minutes long, so just jump forward in the video and you can get to painting. Now, if you haven't watched it before, we're gonna talk about supplies. Really fast, let's talk about brushes. It might surprise you, you really don't need a lot of brushes when you are making a painting. Sometimes I only use one brush the entire time. So keep in mind you don't have to go out and buy like a really big set. There's only really 3 brushes that I would recommend you to go ahead and get or have on hand. I'm going to hold them up close so you can see. The first is the wash brush, and the wash brush is very thick. It holds a lot of water and it is generally a pretty big brush. It's great for covering in areas. So you'll want to have a wash brush. You don't have to have a 1-inch wash brush like this one that I'm showing you. You could get away with doing like a 5/8 or a 1/2-inch wash brush. That's absolutely fine. Shader brush. This guy is absolutely essential to have. This is a number 6 shader. As long as you have something close to a number 6, you are good. I wouldn't go as small as a number 4 or number 2. I would keep with 6 or an 8 shader brush. You'll notice it looks very similar to the wash brush, except it doesn't have quite as many bristles, so it's not as absorbent. It doesn't retain as much water, and it is really great for working in detail. So shader brush is absolutely essential. Make sure you have this guy. The round brush, you can take him or leave him. He's not my favorite brush, but he is kind of important sometimes. So the round brush has kind of a point like a pencil, and this guy is a number 4 round brush. I would stick with something around there. You could get a smaller round brush, that's absolutely fine. They're kind of difficult to use the smaller they get, so keep that in mind. So you'll want to have a wash brush, a shader brush, and a round brush. Of any size, whatever works. This is kind of the theme of all of these online courses, whatever works. Next, you'll want to have some chalk on hand. Chalk, like chalk pastels, basically, is a tool that is absolutely essential for painters. This is something that we use to draw, and it's easily erasable. It also kind of disappears behind paint, so it's a great tool to have. I would suggest having chalk of various colors: white, orange, blue, just because it depends on the canvas that you're working on. Sometimes white doesn't show up, so it's good to have different colors. If you can't find any chalk, if you don't have any on hand, it's okay to use a pencil. Again, the theme is whatever works. We're making it work to get some art made. But pencils are not the best because graphite shows through paint after a while, and also it's harder to erase on your canvas. You might have little pencil marks left behind. So I don't recommend it, but you can use a pencil if you have to. The other things that are absolutely essential to have for this upcoming class is to have a container to wash out your brushes. Okay, it can be anything, old tuna cans, cat cans, whatever. You'll want to have lots of paper towels. Most people go through quite a few. And then you'll also want to have a surface to paint on. Now, you need to have your surface primed in the color that we told you to do. So sometimes we start with red backgrounds, tan backgrounds, blue backgrounds, what have you. You need to have your canvas already painted that color. The reason for that is that the way I teach these videos, we start on a colored ground surface to kind of help us out to save some time. So it's absolutely important that you have that done in advance before you start the video. As far as painting surfaces go, really you could use just about anything. If you really want to paint and you don't have a canvas, no stress. You could use something as simple as cardboard. Just keep in mind that it's not meant to be painted on, so you're gonna run into some issues. It's gonna be kind of difficult. It's also gonna be very absorbent, so you'll want to have like maybe 2 layers of paint laid on there so that it's not soaking in or sucking up the paint. You could use like a cover on a book, an old book that you're not using anymore, rip it off and paint on that. You could use acrylic paper. They do make paper that is thick enough to take heavy-bodied acrylic paint. Not the best options, but they do work. If you have a bunch of stretched canvases at home, this is definitely the way to go. It's going to be archival, which means it'll last longer and you'll be happier with it in the end. So, paintbrushes, miscellaneous tools, your surface. Let's talk about paint now. I would recommend having a heavy-bodied acrylic paint. Heavy-bodied basically means that it's heavier. The pigmentation is denser, so it's not quite as runny and it's not as light in color as some of your craft paints that you get like at like a craft store or Walmart or something like that. So heavy-bodied acrylic paints would be my recommendation. Master's Touch, Liquitex are 2 brands that you can get at Hobby Lobby if you really need one. You can go there. Those aren't my favorite brands, to be honest. Dick Blick is an online art store and they have really good, reasonably priced paint. It's the Studio Dick Blick brand that I really like and that we use at the gallery all of the time. Color-wise, just depends on the painting you're doing, but I recommend having a cadmium red medium hue, cadmium yellow medium hue, cerulean blue, an ultramarine blue, a quinacridone, which is basically a fancy word for magenta, and the last 2 I'd recommend would be your titanium white and your Mars black. You can get away with just having those 7 colors and mixing those. I rarely buy secondary colors unless it's absolutely essential. Another one that you could have on hand if you are willing to buy extra paint would be burnt sienna. That would be a really good one to have as well, and that's a brown. So that concludes my little introduction on supplies. I will get into like teaching you the basics of painting in the video. So I hope you have a wonderful time. Sit back and relax, and I hope this is a good de-stressor for you. Have fun! Hey friends! Thank you so much for joining me today. For Minnie and me, we are painting a cute little bunny rabbit today, and I am so excited to paint with you guys. So before we get started, let's quickly talk about our brushes and how to take care of them. These are our tools that are going to help us paint today, so we need to make sure that we are treating them properly. So before we use a brush for the first time, we always dip it in paint water and pat it dry. The reason for this is that we want our brush to be nice and cool and damp to the touch so that when it is painting, it's not dry and scratchy, it's nice and smooth. It applies the paint nice and smoothly. Next, let's talk about what happens when our brushes get dirty. When your brush is dirty, the thing you want to do is wipe off all extra paint on your palette or on your painting if you need to put it there. And then we follow a little jingle, swirl, tap, and dry. So we swirl our brush in the paint water, we tap it on the rim of the can. When you do that, do you hear how I kind of make a tapping sound, but I also push against the bristles of the brush so it gets it nice and dry? And then I pat it dry just to make sure that I get any extra water out. So swirl, tap, and dry. Makes a clean, happy brush that's ready to move on. So let's move on and get started. We actually don't need our paintbrushes yet. What we actually need is a piece of chalk. I recommend using chalk, but if you don't have it, you can use some pencils. Pencils aren't the best thing to use, but if you have to, you can go for it. So grab your drawing utensil, and then we're going to talk about how to draw this cute little bunny. So the first thing we're gonna do is draw a nice big round head. You want to make sure that your head isn't teeny tiny Okay, if it's teeny tiny, you're gonna have lots of empty space or negative space and not very much room for details. So instead, we wanna fill almost the entire canvas, but we wanna make sure we leave room for his little ears. So I'm going to make kind of a semicircle, okay? It's gonna be actually more of like a circle with just a little tiny bottom cut off. So if you need to, you can make a point or a dot where you would like his head to stop on your canvas. I might bring it down a little bit more to like the halfway point of my canvas. And then from that point, I'm gonna make a nice curvy line that curves and comes down to the bottom. Gonna do the other side and try to make sure that your circle, if you were to draw a line, looks about the same on either side. Now, our paintbrushes are pretty cool tools today. When they don't have paint on them and when they're just nice and damp, they can actually take chalk and paint off. We'll talk more about how to erase paint in a little bit, but for now, you can see it takes my chalk off. If you're drawing with pencil, it's much harder to get rid of it. You're gonna have to get a really big eraser. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do is put in his ears. So I want to start again with a dot so that I know where I want my ears to end. If I start at the head and draw up, I might run out of space and not get the whole ear in, which is okay if that's what you want. But if you want to start a whole ear, then you put a little dot. Now I'm gonna start with a point, and then it's gonna be like a teardrop. It's gonna come out and get rounder and connect to his head. I'm gonna do the exact same thing, just in reverse on the other side. And now I have one ear and ear number 2. So I have my ears. Remember, you can always perfect them, but this is your sloppy copy. It's not exactly how it's gonna look, so it's okay if it's not perfect. And then even though we're going to paint over them, I'm going to draw 2 little semicircles for his paws right here, because I want to make sure that I paint his paws white on this next step. Okay, so I have my bunny all drawn. I can take my chalk and set it to the side for now. Now we're going to start filling in space on our bunny, and we want to paint the bunny in solid. We're going to use just plain white paint to paint in our bunny, and then we'll come back in and add color in a little bit. So my brush, it is primed, it's ready to go, but if your brush isn't, dip it in the paint water, tap it, get all that extra water out, and then pat it dry so that your brush is nice and cool and damp to the touch, but it's not dripping wet. And then grab just a little bit of paint on your brush. Now, if you grab a glob like that, you're gonna have a messy painting. If you don't want a messy painting, then you can take, and here, let me show you. You can take your big, huge glob and you can wipe it on the side of your foam plate so that you have less paint on there. Now, sometimes the paint likes to get a little dry, so I dip my paintbrush in water and I mix it into the paint, but I do that on the side of the pile, not in the middle, but on the side. It keeps my brush a little bit cleaner and it makes my paint perfect and ready to use. Now, I'm gonna show you 2 ways to use your brush. You can use the top edge to make a line, or you can use the side of the brush to fill in. Top edge makes a line, side fills in. If you are a beginner painter, you could use a smaller brush. I'm using my biggest wash brush, but you could use a shader brush or a round brush for this step if you are a beginner painter. Now, when my paint starts getting dry and scratchy like that, do you see all that texture it picks up? That means I need more water in my paint and maybe a little bit more paint on my brush. Okay, you want it nice and smooth. So the first thing that I do, I make myself a little guide. I want to stay inside my chalk lines. So I'm going to go along my lines and outline them in white. Now I'm filling in my ears, I'm filling in my rabbit's head, and I'm filling in his little paws. So you really don't have to do a line right there. You can leave it open because you know you're gonna fill that in. But if you want to, you can. This is your painting. Keep in mind that you can kind of have fun towards the end and do your own thing and add some new details if you want to. Now, the other thing I'm going to do really fast, I know I want my rabbit to have a cute little hairdo, like he just woke up. So I use the top of my brush and I kind of tap it on just like that, and it makes him look nice and fluffy. Now that I have my outline, I'm going to start at my outline and work my way inside. Do you see how by having that guideline, I am staying inside my lines? I'm making sure I have clean, crisp bunny ears, and I'm also not making his ears bigger by going outside my lines. So fill them in. I'm going to do that super fast. If you need to pause the video because I'm going too fast, no worries. Just pause and resume when you're ready. Now, the green is going to pop through the white a little bit, and that's okay. Don't stress. What you can do, or what we will all do, I should say, is that we will add a second layer of paint in just a little bit. The first layer has to dry. Acrylic paint, which is what we're using today, is kind of picky. He likes to come in layers. Okay, so you have to put down one layer, let it dry, and then do another layer and let it dry. All paint works differently, and acrylic paint is kind of particular. So I have my bunny all done. Now you might see some chalk lines left over. That's okay, don't touch them yet. We'll erase them later. What I need you to do after you get your whole bunny filled in is to take your brush and clean it out. So remember, scrape all that extra paint off if you have a bunch, and then you swirl it in the paint water, tap it on the side, and pat it dry. Swirl, tap, and dry makes clean, happy brushes that are ready to move on. All right, so I am going to put in some grass next. While we're waiting for our bunny to dry, we're going to work on the outside area around our bunny. Now, you can take your green and add black to it to make it darker. Or if you have blue on hand, you can mix some blue into it and it'll make the green darker and look like a blue-green. The reason I'm making a darker version of the paint is so that I can work on the back and put in some little weeds behind our bunny, like he is peeping out of the grass. And the reason I'm making it darker is because if I used the same kind of green that I painted my canvas, well, it wouldn't show up. So we have to make a different version of green so that it'll pop. So I have my dark green made. I'm going to grab a little bit on my brush. Remember, you can use a smaller brush. I like using my big brush, but if you haven't painted a lot, it's a good idea to work with smaller brushes, especially if you have a small surface like I do. So I'm going to start right at the bottom, and I'm going to make a nice tall blade of grass. Okay, as it comes up, it should come to a point. So at the beginning, I push really hard on my brush. As I work my way up, I press lighter and it comes to a thinner point. And that's because the harder you press on your brush, the thicker your line's going to be. The thinner or lighter you press on your brush, the lighter the line will be. Notice that my brush is very thick if I hold it this way going up and down, but it's very thin if I hold it this way going up and down. You want to hold it at its thinnest point if you're using your big brush. Now I'm going to be very careful and I'm going to work around my bunny, and I'm going to put some blades of grass, some lines around and behind my bunny. So I'm going right up to the white. I'm making sure I'm very careful not to go into my white. And I'm putting some grass in, just so that he doesn't look like he's in an empty field. Bunnies don't like to be in open spaces. They like to hide in the grass. So we're making our bunny nice and comfortable. Okay, once you're happy with your grass, you can move on. Now I'm going to take more blue on my brush and I'm going to mix it into my green to make it darker. And then I'm going to put just a few little tiny lines on top so that it looks like my grass has layers. Okay, and I'm done. We're ready to move on. We have our grass, we have our bunny, the first layer done anyway. Now we're going to move on to do the second layer. Now your painting might look like mine and it might be a little wet. You can always pause the video and let your painting dry. I'm gonna let it dry while I talk to you about how to mix your paint. I'm using a palette knife, but if you don't have one of those, you can use a brush to mix your paint. I'm gonna grab a nice big helping of white paint and I'm gonna put it in a new area, just like we did when we mixed our green. Then I am going to clean off my palette knife and grab a teensy weensy bit of yellow, not very much, and mix it into my white. Now, if you grab too much yellow, you're not going to have an off-white, you're gonna have a light yellow. You want more of a cream or an off-white. So if you're like me and you have too much yellow, you just grab more white and mix it in until you get the nice kind of off-white tannish color that we are going for with our bunny. And I have my color. Now, if you're using a palette knife, you can scrape the paint all together so that it's more into a pile. You can try doing that with your paintbrush, but it's a little harder. And there we go. We have our butter color. Now, before we go too far, we're going to also mix a pink, a very light pink. If you have red, you're going to use a really little tiny bit of red. If you have a pink, like I do, you might have to use a little bit more, but it's always better to start with just a little less because it really goes a long way. I'm mixing a pink for my ears. Now I do want to grab more because I'm using a quinacridone is what it's called, but it's just a fancy word for magenta. And I'm making a nice pink. We're just getting this out of the way because we know that we're going to have to use pink in a little bit. And we're also allowing our bunny a little bit more time to dry. Okay, now we're going to do a second layer on our bunny and we're going to use this cream color that we just mixed because we don't want our bunny to be perfect and white. We want him to be a little creamy. Now, as you're painting this, you need to make sure that you're going right up to the line and you're not going past. So remember, start at the line and then work your way in. Now you might have noticed that I just did something just then. I took some white and mixed it into my cream as I was painting. You can do that, okay? A lot of times painters don't just use one color. They'll use a whole bunch of colors all at the same time as they're painting. So I'm going to focus my cream kind of on the outside of his body and then I can go back to like a lighter white in the center. I don't have to worry so much about the center of his face or the center of his ears because we're going to add more details that will cover that area up. We're going to add pink to the inside of his ears that will cover that up. So really, I would focus on his paws and the outsides of his face and his little patch of hair right here. Make it super cute and nice and fluffy. Notice how sometimes I use my brush to kind of tap in an area. That's really important, okay? That makes texture. If you're doing a smooth, clean brush stroke going back and forth, it makes a nice flat area. If you use your brush to do some tapping, it'll create texture, which is very nice, but it's not always necessary. So don't overuse it. Okay, I have my bunny's face kind of semi-done. I might have to add another layer. Keep in mind that you can rotate your canvas as you need. I flip my bunny on his head sometimes if I have to get to an area. And I'm just going to put a little bit of cream on the outsides of his ears and leave the insides alone because I know I'm coming back with my pink. All right, so I have my bunny almost completely done as far as the first layer goes. I'm going to start working on his ears next. So, with the same brush that we've been using, or if you prefer, you can use a smaller one. As we get farther in our painting, we're working more and more detailed. So we're gonna have to start whipping out the smaller brushes. So I'm going to follow my own advice and grab my shader brush. This is a number 6 shader. And I am going to do kind of the same thing that I did before. I'm going to outline where I want my pink to go, just like we outlined with our bunny. And once you have that outline in pink, in that pink that you mixed up, we can fill it in. Okay, now as you are filling this in, remember, you don't have to just use pink. You could grab some white to make it lighter. You could even add some cream kind of on the tips. Like it is like it's transitioning is what the word I was trying to say, to the outside of his ear. So it's getting lighter as it goes up, but staying nice and dark at the base. So I'm almost done with my ears. And then I can move on. We have a bunny face to do. Now, make sure you're happy with how you painted it. For instance, I noticed that I have kind of a flat line right here. I'm going to put more of a curve. And I also brought my pink a little too far down onto his head. Now that is an easy fix. We could take our clean damp brush and we could erase. What happens sometimes is that you end up erasing the layer underneath as well. So in this particular case, I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to put paint on top of the pink to cover it up. So when I do that, I can have a little bit of fun with it. Notice how fluffy his the top of his head is? Well, I'm going to make his ears nice and fluffy as well. This might be a happy accident, a good mistake. That's unlike the first one I did. Okay, I'm done with my basic bunny outline shape, and now I'm going to start adding in a whole bunch of details. We're going to do this step by step and do this together. So the very first thing we need to do is mix up a new color. This will give us a little bit of time to let our bunny dry, which is going to be a good thing because, oh my bunny is really wet. So I'm going to grab my palette knife and I'm going to grab a little bit of black paint and I'm going to grab a whole bunch of white paint. Now I'm out of white paint, so I'm going to grab some from my tube. And I'm going to mix this together to make, can you guess what it makes? A light gray. And this light gray is going to be the color that we use to add a whole bunch of details onto our bunny. We're not using black because this bunny is nice and light and cream colored. So if we used black, it would look a little odd. It would have too much contrast and it would stand out maybe in a bad way. Instead, we're using something that will look a little bit more natural and a little bit lighter, our light gray. So once you have your light gray mixed up, we're going to start adding details. Now the round brush is a really good brush for making curvy lines. We haven't used him yet, so we need to prime him. I'm going to dip him in the paint water and then pat him dry so that he's clean and damp to the touch. Now I need to mix a little bit of water into my paint, and we're going to talk about how to make a really nice line really fast. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but it's good to review. I mix a little bit of water into my paint so it's nice and fluid. It's easier to work with. And then I'm going to talk to you about a line. If you press hard, you are going to have a thick, heavy line. If you press lighter, you are going to have a thin, light line. So what happens when you press light is that you don't put a lot of pressure on your paintbrush. You might want to hold your paintbrush a little bit closer to the bristles of the brush, kind of like you hold a pencil at school, and that will make a nice thin line. If you press hard, do you see how it bends my whole brush over? It's going to make a very thick line. That's okay if you want thick lines, but if you're going for thin, light lines, you're going to have to press really light as a feather. Now I'm going to start on his ears and work my way down. I want to put in some little tiny details on his ears. We don't have to outline the whole thing, but I do want to outline a few parts of it. Now guess what? I made a mistake. When I was mixing my gray, I mixed it too light. I need a little bit more black in it. Do you see how it doesn't really stand out? You can't really see what's happening. If your paint, your gray paint, doesn't stand out and you can't see what's happening, then that means you need to mix more black to make it darker. I am mixing up a much darker gray, but I'm only using a little bit of a black at a time so that I don't make it too dark. So let's try this out. I mixed just a little bit more in. Now I think I'm ready to go. Okay, oh, much better. Can you see the difference now? It stands out much, much more than before. So I can put a few little tiny lines into his hair to make it stand out. And I'm also going to outline kind of the sides of his ears down at the bottom of the base of his head. I'm also going to go down to his paw and then stop, okay? We'll talk about the paw in just a moment. I'm going to finish up his ears first. So I'm going to treat the other ear exactly the same way, putting in a little bit of gray. You don't have to do it everywhere. You can just do it kind of at the base. And then I'm going to bring that gray line down the sides of his head and stop once I get to the paw. Now, let's quickly do the paws. We're going to put back in a line that is a semicircle that makes his paw stand out so that it looks like our rabbit is peeking above the grass, trying to figure out what you're doing. Maybe he's hiding Easter eggs, or he hid a whole bunch of Easter eggs and now he's watching all of the kids find them. So I have my two paws. I have my outlines for my ears and my head. Now I'm going to start putting in some details. I'm going to put in two little lines in the center of that half circle that we just did. And those are for his little bunny paws. They go off the canvas. And I'm making them a little thicker. Okay. Now, we've done a lot to our bunny, but we still have his little bunny face to do. Before we do that, we need to let our painting dry. So, you can fan it back and forth, or you can set it down and leave it, go grab a drink or a snack. But before you leave, let's talk about that bunny face. There are lots of things that you can do. Now, I'm not suggesting that you use Sharpie. I'm going to show you on a white piece of paper with black Sharpie so that it shows up a little bit more on the camera. So, I'm going to draw my bunny. Looks like my Sharpie's running out, so. Okay, your bunny looks something like this. Hopefully a little bit better, because I didn't do a very good job drawing. Oh, and then of course we have the paws. Okay, so there are lots of different things that you can do. The very first thing that we're going to do is draw his nose, and that's going to be in the center of his face. So I'm going to draw an upside down triangle. The first thing I do is do a curved line, and then starting on the edges of my curved line, I bring more curved lines into a point like an upside down triangle, and that's his nose. Then I can draw his cute little mouth, and I do little tiny hooks that come out from the bottom of his nose and away towards the edges of his face. Next, we need to have some little dots for his whiskers. You can put in the whiskers super fast. I'll show you how to paint all of this in a little bit, but I just want to show you how to draw it for now. Next, the eyes. Oh my goodness, you can do so many different things with the eyes. I'm going to start small and then work bigger so you can see all the different things you can do. Now, you could do just simple little lines. And now he looks like a happy bunny. If you did a curved line on the bottom, then it would be an entire eye, and he would look like he was awake and not so much asleep or happy. If you want really big eyes like the original, then you could bring them up with these little lines out on the side and then do curves on the top. And that gives him more of a cartoonish look, okay? A more animated look. So you get to choose what kind of expression that your bunny is making. The last thing that really gives your bunny expression are these little eyebrows. If he has one raised and one smaller, it kind of looks like he's looking down at something and is really happy. So that is how we're going to draw our bunny. Now that my canvas is a little bit drier, I'll be able to draw. I'm going to use a different colored chalk. If you have a different color of chalk, you can use that too. Or you can use pencil if you have to. But remember, pencil doesn't work very well. So the first thing I'm going to do is do my curved little line. I'm going to bring the sides down to a point, and then I'm going to make a curved mouth that's super happy. Now I'm going to put in some dots and his whiskers. Make sure that your canvas is nice and dry before you do this. If you hit a wet piece of paint, then it might be hard to draw on. And then I can't decide what kind of eyes I'm going to do. Man, I could go simple, remember, and just do little curved happy lines, or I could make it a little bit more detailed. And I think that's the way I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the big cartoon eyes. And then, of course, remember his little eyebrows. Very important. Now, we are going to use gray for all of the details, except for the inside of his nose and the insides of his eyes. Okay, so we're going to leave the inside of his nose and the inside of his eyes alone for now, because we'll come back in and paint them in a little bit. I'm going to continue using my round brush, and I'm going to outline his nose. Not painting the inside, remember, but just outlining. I'm going to leave his eyes alone, and I'm going to paint them all black in just a second. I'm going to do his whiskers. Ooh, I made thick whiskers. That's okay. That happens sometimes. And I'm going to give him the start of his whiskers. And some more whiskers. And ooh, I forgot his eyebrows. Very important. He looks mischievous with eyebrows. Okay. Mischievous means he looks like he's up to something. He's ornery. He is maybe causing trouble. Or causing pranks. Okay. So I have almost everything done. I'm going to start working on his nose and his eyes. So, like I said before, we use pink to fill in his nose. Because it's such a small space, I would recommend making sure that you have a tiny brush that you're using for this process. I'm using my round brush. And if you want, you could make his nose kind of shiny. So I'm going to put just a little bit of a white shine on the top. And I can also put, with the dark gray, 2 little lines for his nostrils. Okay, now his eyes are a little tricky, so we have to do this in an interesting way. I'm going to do them a little different than I did my original picture. I'm going to use medium gray after all to outline my eyes, just to give myself a guide so I can see what I'm doing. And then I'm going to do his eyes not solid black like the original. I'm going to show you a different way how to do them. I'm going to take white and I'm going to fill in the top part. So everything before that little curved line that I put in that's right there. That's probably hard to see for you guys. Now I'm trying something different. If this doesn't work, then I can always cover it up with black and call it good and do it like the original. But sometimes it's good to try new things. Paint covers paint. If all else fails, let it dry and come back to it in a little bit, and you can paint over it. That's the good thing about acrylic paint. Now I'm going to take straight black, and I have to be very careful because this black, once it's on, it's on. It's hard to cover up. In fact, it's sometimes better to erase rather than cover it up. So remember, you take a clean, damp brush and kind of wiggle back and forth, and all that paint will come up if it's still wet. Okay. I have the whites of my eyes, and I have little black pupils. Now I can finish off by using the back end of my brush and grabbing a chunk of paint, of white paint, and I can put a little dot in the corner for like light that's being reflected from his eyes. And then whenever you do that, you go to the opposite kind of diagonal line and you put in a little line just to make his eyes look really cute and like he is alive. Okay, so that finishes up my painting. I hope that you had a blast painting with us today. Remember, we will bring Garden City Arts will offer another Minnie and Me painting class next Saturday. So if you really enjoyed this one, make sure you have all of the supplies you need. We'll post it on our Facebook events, and get ready to have fun at 1 p.m. on Saturday next week. Bye! Have a wonderful weekend!